Hi, my name is Jim Jesselnick and I'm the president of the Golf Heritage Society. I want to welcome you all here today. We are pleased to have Dr. Mike Hurdzan give a presentation. We also want to give a special thank you to Professor Carl Dannenberger from The Ohio State University for his help today as well. Mike is the founder and president of Mike Hurdzan Golf Design. He was born in West Virginia, but I found out earlier today that he's really lived here in Ohio all his life, so he's an official Buckeye. He's authored 6 books, and the Hurdzan name appears on over 400 plus projects on 5 different continents, including several top 100 golf course designs. Another thing I learned earlier is you've all heard of golf's Grand Slam for players. Well, Mike is a Grand Slam winner and only one of 7 individuals for non-playing individuals to garner the golf industry's other big 3. The Golf Course Superintendents Association, the American Society of Golf Course Architects, and the Golf Course Builders Association. The other 6 people on this list are Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus, Byron Nelson, Robert Trent Jones Sr., Reese Jones, and Pete Dye. Today, Mike is here to tell us about the history and the design of one of his most notable accomplishments, Erin Hills in Erin, Wisconsin, host of the 2011 U.S. Amateur Championship and the 2017 U.S. Open Championship. Let's give a warm welcome to Mike Hurdzan.
Thank you, Jim. And it is my pleasure to be here at the Golf Heritage Society. You know, it's interesting, all historians are interested in history, but not all historians are necessarily golf collectors or collectors. But collectors, I would say all collectors are historians. And the reason for that is that collectors understand that what gives things life, meaning, and value is the backstory. It's those things that have made that place or person or whatever it is special. And what's also interesting is collectors know that this backstory is usually made up of fact and fiction, myth and legend, truth and lies, and a number of other things that are that story. And if you think about it, those are the exact same elements that make up fairy tales. And so that's why I've titled this topic, you know, the Erin Hills fairy tale story. And bear with me while I try to tell this in a fairy tale way about what we did at Erin Hills. Now, once upon a time, in a faraway land called Wisconsin, near the kingdom of Milwaukee is the village of Erin. And in that village of Erin, in and around that area, live some very wonderful but strange people. They had a great deal of love of the outdoors and of sports, and they had some very strange pets as well. But they lived in a very beautiful part of the world with lots of land and water, and the land had been shaped by the glacier. And so it has a remarkable character to it. In the year 2000, a young prince who had a magical touch wanted to build basically a new kingdom on an old piece of land. And that young prince was a guy named Bob Lang. And Bob Lang is this gentleman right here. Bob Lang really started out as a developer, and he was so successful at building homes that all of a sudden he started taking office buildings and restoring office buildings. He made a lot of money doing that. And one day his wife said, you know, I'm really having trouble finding a calendar that has some old heritage pictures on it. So he started the Lang Calendar Company and the Lang Paper Company, and he made lots of money with that. And so every single thing that Bob Lang touched seemingly turned to gold. And being a very generous man that he is, some people said, you know, you really ought to build a golf course, if nothing more, just from your employees. Well, he didn't know much about golf at all, but that sounded like a good idea to Bob, and he certainly had the money to do that, and he lived in a beautiful part of of the land near the town of Erin. So he sets about doing some planning. Well, it just so happens there was a young gentleman, a young knave, if you will, and that's this guy, Steve Tratner, who absolutely loved the game of golf, was obsessed by the game of golf, had zero money. And the only thing that Steve wanted to do in his life was to be the general manager of a golf club. So he thought that he would work in and around people as much as he could to help them develop a golf course. Well, there's this wonderful piece of ground that now became Erin Hills, but previously people had recognized was a great golf course site, but it never got developed. It never had the money to do it. And Steve was affiliated with those folks and knew that it was a great site. And when it all fell through, when all the land leases went through, Steve actually borrowed as much money as he possibly could and got an option on that land. And now he's trying to find a developer. And someone says, you should meet this young prince, Bob Lang. He's got the money. And so Steve and Bob started to work together and put together this package. Steve had all of the background and was very intense about all of the studies, was a computer programmer and with an accounting background. And Bob was just a very enthusiastic guy that was always, push it all in, let's go for it in the middle of it. Well, in the process of developing this land, Steve and Bob end up hiring Hurdzan Fry. And in addition to that, they brought along Ron Whitten, who is the Golf Digest editor and a longtime friend. And we have this beautiful piece of ground. So that's the cast of characters: Bob Lang, Steve Tratner, got Ron Whitten, Dana Fry, and me. Well, this site, back in the year 8000 BC, was under about a mile of ice. And as that ice receded, it left these glacial features that would be very similar to lynx land. The difference is with lynx land we find in Europe is that area is usually formed by the sea or the river depositing sand, and then the wind blows it up into big high sand dunes. Whereas with the glacier scrapes away all of the earth in front of it, and then as it starts to recede, it drops all of that earth, and it forms this same uncontorted landscape. And so you would have things like this that would form where there might have been a block of ice, and then when the ice melted, then you would have this kettle hole. And so this piece of ground has been in the formation for 10,000 years, because this is what the site looked like in the year 2000 when Bob Lang first got a lease on about 200 acres of this land. And as we started to work this land, you can see there are very few trees. It's very drouthy. It drains very well, but it has some wonderful undulations to it. And it was very close to a landmark there called Holy Hill. And Holy Hill was the highest point in the county. There had been a small church on there since the middle 1800s. Later on, there was actually a log cabin, and later on there was a proper church that was built there. And then finally, they recognized the value of that site, and now there's this big basilica that's there. And so we have the basilica at Holy Hill, and then we have the piece of ground that Bob Lang has a lease on and is buying that was going to become Erin Hills. But we had to set some goals in the planning of Erin Hills. And so as Ron and Dana and I were working with Steve Tratner and Bob Lang, these were our goals. We wanted to build a $50 green fee golf course. We wanted to be the poor man's Whistling Straight. We wanted, in order to do that, the golf course had to be inexpensive to build and to maintain. It had to be environmentally correct, and that is use the least amount of water, fertilizer, pesticide, and fossil fuels in order to maintain it. And the method of design that we used was called the old Tom Morris method. And basically we would go over the ground, and we would identify what we thought were really, really good green sites, and then we would work backwards to find landing areas, and then from those landing areas we would work backwards to find the tees. And so instead of building or designing the golf course from tee to green, this went from greens back towards the tees. And again, the idea was to find as natural a site as we possibly could, because we wanted minimal earth moving. One of the other goals we had was never to change the grade that the glacier had left more than a foot. So 12 inches was the maximum grade change we were willing to accept. And so that made it very unique as well. And so as it turned out, we had a big piece of ground where we could put a big golf course on, a great range, and a short game center, because we had so much land to work with. There was no housing involved. And what we wanted to do was to populate that land with something called fine fescue grasses. And these fine fescue grasses do in fact use less water, fertilizer, pesticide, and they were growing naturally on the site. So those were the goals that we had as we started into the design of it. The challenge was there was so much land, and it was so interesting, and Bob got so caught up into this that he was continuing to buy more land. And so we started with a little over 300 acres, and then he would add more land, and we would redo the routing, and then we'd add more land, and we would do it. Finally ends up with around 650 acres of land for one 18-hole golf course. Typically an 18-hole golf course is maybe 200 acres. So we had a lot to work with. And so what we were trying to find was not just a good golf course, but the 18 best holes that we could develop and build. And the construction method we used was really, really simple. Again, we were trying to build a very inexpensive golf course. And in fact, the golf course was built for well under $2 million. There's a lot of places where they would laugh at that. But the way we were able to do it was we built the greens using what we called was the California method. And basically you can see in this photograph is that this is the tile lines that are laid out. This is the inside of the green, and nothing outside the green was touched, because we wanted to preserve all of the existing grades. So normally in a golf course, you might rip out everything and take off the topsoil and reshape it and put it back. Here, we were trying to work to the native grades. In fact, one bulldozer operator shaped all the golf holes in 10 days with a relatively small bulldozer. We weren't changing very much grade at all. So once we have the green pie shelled out, if you will, and we used flat drain tiles, so there was no trenching involved. You just simply roll this stuff out. It looks like it's about the size of that book in front of Jim. You just roll the tile out, and we use big nails, and we nail it down into the soil. And then the next step is to dump the sand, native sand, raw sand, along the edge of the green, push it out with a dozer, and you can see this is a step in the way of the green construction. Everything was very, very simply done. And when it came to doing the fairway areas, as an example, this is a fairway area, and you can see this green strip that's going up. That's where the irrigation heads are going to go. And so we didn't want to trench any more than necessary, so we pulled in the pipe for the irrigation, and then they would dig a little hole where the irrigation head was going to go. And we sprayed out all of the existing grasses that were there, because we wanted to use our own grasses, and so that none of the earth was really disturbed. And then we went back when it was all had been dyed, and we had the irrigation in, and we purposely limited the irrigation to 2 sets of irrigation heads. A lot of golf courses will be 4 or 5 sets of heads wide. This was only 2, keeping with our goals. We planted it, and then we seeded it with a tool that looks like that, and then pretty soon we got germination, and then ultimately we ended up with a golf course that looked like this. And so here we have a very simply designed, very simply built golf course that really has some incredible qualities to it. And before the golf course was even built, the USGA had visited, David Fay had visited with 1 or 2 of the committeemen and saw the phenomenal golf course that was being built and wanted to award in a tournament. And so they actually visited in 2006 2006, and David Fay said, I want to give you the 2007 Ladies Pub Links. Well, we weren't even finished building the golf course. We were still trying to get that done. And so now he said, no. And of course, Bob Lang is thinking, yes, this is what we want. And so he said, yes, we'll take the tournament. So we're thinking, damn, Bob, we don't even have the golf course done. It's not going to be ready. Thankfully, when David Fay got back to the office, he had made a mistake. They'd already awarded the 2007, so we got to 2008, and then it allowed us some time to grow the golf course in. So even in the early stages, USGA recognized this was a special golf course. Well, what makes it special? Why this golf course that's being built that people recognize for its golf challenges, but yet it doesn't have any out of bounds, there are no water hazards, there are no trees, there are no forced carries. So what makes this a great tournament golf course? Well, basically, it was the firm, fast, fescue grasses that we planted, where the ball would land and it might bounce 10 or 15 feet in the air, and then it might roll for 30, 40, 50 yards. And so now it wasn't a matter of playing yard darts and sticking the ball. It's a matter of figuring out where do you want to land the ball, and where's the ball going to release to, and what's that going to leave as the next shot in. It was like playing a game of 14-1 pool, where you had to make the object ball, but you had to leave the cue ball in the right spot in order to make the next ball. And so it became a much more cerebral game, and so because of the fine fescue grasses, and especially if it was dry. There was lots of slope on that land because we were working with what the glacier had given us, and the wind can be tremendous. Typically it's an 18 to 20 mile an hour wind every single day there, and so you had to really calculate the wind. That was part of the game. But it was really the bunkers that were the true hazard. And we wanted to develop bunkers that were so ferocious that people would avoid them at all costs. And we had two kinds of bunkers, well, maybe two and a half. One was called an erosion bunker. An erosion bunker was meant to look as if water had created it, as if the water had created a little gully and then it exposed the sand down below, and that became the erosion bunker. And so a lot of these bunkers have that look to them. The second kind of bunker that we wanted to create was called a blowout bunker. And a blowout bunker was basically where the wind had blown away the sand and exposed this raw sand face. And so the idea then was that we would have the two kinds of bunkers, and in actuality we would have a combination of blowout bunkers and erosion bunkers. But that was, we wanted to make the bunkers so challenging that you didn't want to be in them. And this is the 9th hole, which is a par 3, 165 yards. This was the single hardest hole on Saturday of the US Open at 165 yards for the best players in the world. Well, why was that? It was a configuration of the green and in the bunkers and the hole locations, and you can see where in some of these it appears that it looks like an erosion, and other places where we would have the sand might be eroded, and so the bunkers became something that you wanted to avoid at all costs. And that started to work into the psyche of the golfers, because you got these uneven lies. You might be up against a grass edge, you might have to play backwards to get out. And the fairways were really, really wide. Fairways were, a narrow fairway was 50 yards wide. A usual country club might be 32 yards wide. So these fairways were almost 50% bigger than a normal country club fairway. And in some fairway, like the 10th fairway, it was 110 yards wide. Fairway, so you could play the ball there or there or there, depending on how the ball would land and bounce and roll and what kind of shot you would have left. And so it became a puzzle. Well, the site was good enough that it had the 2008 Pub Links, the 2011 Amateur, and then shortly after they got awarded the US Open. In In 2022, they're going to have the U.S. Mid-Am, and then in 2025, the U.S. Women's Open as well. So this golf course will have had 5 USGA tournaments within about a 15 or 18 year span, and because of those qualities. But yet it's a place where people can play every day. When we designed, this is the 8th hole, this is the 18th hole playing back, and everything was keyed on Holy Hill. You can see Holy Hill from 14 of the golf holes, either at the tees or up onto the greens. And so Holy Hill became a landmark that we really developed. And the 18th hole in particular was one of those holes that we settled on early in the design process and said this has to be it. And so this is what the golf course looks like, and those are the things that happen. Well, Bob was an all-in guy, you know, push all the chips to the middle. And in 2007, when the economy went down the tank, and in the early part of 2008, Bob had lots of money invested in housing, a lot of money invested in the office buildings, and he was running out of money. And the golf course wasn't open. And so ultimately, he couldn't, and the bank called his note. They basically said, you know, you've got 60 days to come up with the $10 million or it's gone. So Bob becomes a little bit desperate about, as much as he doesn't want to, he has to sell the golf course. He doesn't want to sell to Herb Kohler because he thinks he's in competition with Herb. So Herb was, even though Herb made him a good offer, he pushed that away. And Bob had $22 million invested in the golf course at that time. Only $2 million in the construction. The rest of it was in the land that he bought. He bought 20 acres out by the freeway where he could have a parking lot so the buses could take people back and forth to the tournament. There were $600,000 and $700,000 homes on the property. At least that's what he paid for them. And he either destroyed them or moved them off the property. And he just got himself in debt. And he goes bankrupt. Well, in this fairy tale story, a prince on a white horse rides up by the name of Andy Ziegler. Andy Ziegler is a hedge fund manager from Milwaukee who doesn't really care about golf that much, but his friends say, you know, there's a great golf course out there that you can fly pretty cheap. So he goes to visit Bob. Bob is asking $22 million, and Andy, if I have the story right, this is where fact, fiction, legend, all those things come into play, is that Andy offers 18. Bob said, no, I'm not going to take a $4 million hit. So time goes on, the bank says, you got 30 days. So Andy comes back again. He said, I'm going to give you 15. Bob said, you offered me 18 before. He said, yes, but you didn't take it. And so he said 15. Well, now Bob is convinced he can find somebody else, so he turns Andy down. They get within a few days of the bank taking it back. Andy comes back and offers $11 million, and Bob has to take it. And so now we have this new king of the kingdom, if you will, in Andy Ziegler. And Andy, that $11 million was chump change to him. You know, he's managing a hedge fund that's worth billions. I mean, he has jumping horse farms in England and Belgium and down in Florida, and Andy's just got a lot of money. And so he comes in, buys the golf course, and he builds a new clubhouse. He didn't like Bob's clubhouse, so he built a new clubhouse. They built a new maintenance center, and he started building cabins around the new clubhouse. And then he built a caddy barn, and then he raised the maintenance budgets to, you know, whatever numbers he needed, blank check basically. Made it a walking only golf course because he thought that he didn't want golf cars out on the fescue grasses. And before the Open, he actually closed the golf course on the 6th of October, even though the golf tournament wasn't going to be played until June of the following year. And they had 45 people working on the crew from the 6th of October until the Open. A typical golf course, even a high-end golf course, might have 30 or 32. These guys had 45, an unlimited budget. And so the USGA loves this guy. He is the crown prince as far as they're concerned. And so that's sort of the story of how we got to there. But there were some personal tragedies, just like every good fairy tale has. Bob goes broke, which I've told you about. Steve Trattner ends up killing his wife and is now doing a lifetime sentence in a Wisconsin prison. So he never gets to see the golf course. Bob's son believes that Bob frittered away his inheritance, and so he commits suicide on a park bench in New York City. Steve Pope, I've given this talk 3 times and I've broken up every time. Every time I say Steve's name. He was a guy, he was a project superintendent that worked with us to build a golf course. And he died. Was in his truck, had a heart attack, and died. Greenskeeper was killed on the way to work one day. A balloon crashes during the Open, and then a spectator dies of a heart attack during the Open. Actually, his wife had died a week before, and he had asked his son. His son said, "You know, Dad, you need to help kind of forget. Let's go to the Open." And the guy dies in the stands at the Open. So there were personal tragedies along the way, like every good fairy tale should have. But the USGA was excited by the potential for competition. The only things missing during that US Open week in 2017 was Tiger, who was healing, Phil, whose daughter had a graduation, high school graduation, and he went to that, and the wind. There was no wind. And the golf course was really predicated on having wind. And then in addition to that, it rained on Monday, Tuesday, and Friday. And so now the golf course is not firm and fast and dry, it's wet. And so now the golf course is not living up to how we designed it. The golf course played at 7,700 yards. It was soft, no wind, doesn't make any difference. 6 of the top 10 in the world couldn't make the cut. They were trunk slammers on Friday. Dustin, Rory, Jason, Henrik, Alex, then you had Rose, Watson, Duffner, Scott, Schwartzel, a whole bunch of guys. Why was that? Well, it's because they thought they could overpower that golf course instead of trying to play smart, trying to play the ball to the right place and let the ball release and leave yourself a good shot coming in. And Dustin Johnson even said as much. He said, "I just felt that I could hit it as hard as I could and I would never be in any trouble." And in fact, they was. Dustin Thomas shoots 63 on Saturday, but he follows it up with a 75 on Sunday. The wind finally starts to blow. The wind starts Saturday night and it plays Sunday during the tournament. Only 8 out of 82 guys shot 70 or better, or shot 70 or better on Sunday. So now the golf course is really playing to its full potential, and that is to be a shot maker's golf course. But the USGA is very satisfied. The successes is that it was loved by the golfers, spectators, the TV, and the community. And there was all these concerns about logistics. How are we going to get to this little golf course out in the sticks of Wisconsin, and the crowds, and where are people going to stay, and where are they going to eat, and how are we going to handle it? And the USGA was nervous, and so they limited their ticket sales as well. The golf course could handle 100 or 150,000 people a day because it's so big and it's so spread out, and there's so many spectator areas, because typically the holes are built in the valleys and then you have all these hills around it. But it became a golf destination. Now you had Whistling Straits, and you had Erin Hills, and then you add in Sand Valley that's being built, and then you have Lawsonia Links, which is the old Bill Langford golf course, and all of a sudden Wisconsin is a place to go play golf. There was a lot of money was made by everybody, a lot of personally rewarding parts of it as well. Dana Fry, my business partner, me, and Ron Whitten. We were, in fact, rock stars for 1 week. We signed more things and did more interviews, and even though no one had ever heard of us before, they figured, oh, what the hell, get them to sign it. And we were happy to sign anything and everything. And so I had a lot of fun. We had family and friends were there. The USGA gave us all the tickets that we needed. Most of us had between 15 and 22 people from family or very close friends that were there. We made a heck of a week out of it. We had access to the players and the places. We had these, I don't know if there's any of the pictures, we usually took them off, but we had these magic lanyards that were a bright lemon green, and they basically were an all-access lanyard. And so, I mean, we would walk up onto it. I'd be from here to the flag watching the guys tee off, or, you know, stand on the edge of a green and watch them putt. And it was if I was a USGA official. And so we had full access. Our name recognition went high for a week, and we had a lot of fun along the way. And so that was extraordinarily memorable, and we had our day in the sun. Best memories for me personally was, well, having my family there, my son and my wife and my mom, with a lot of other family members. Again, unfortunately, this pole was right in the middle of Ron, but this is Koepka knocking in the winning putt on the 18th hole, and we're standing on the edge of the green watching it, and to have that kind of access to that kind of play. And it was kind of interesting too, because no one had ever heard of Brooks Koepka. Who's this Koepka guy that wins this thing? Some big name guy is supposed to win it. Well, some big name guy did win it, and he won the next 3 majors as well. So it's the story, the backstory behind the people, places, and things. And in addition, I had a very good experience. This is the 15th hole, and the 15th hole is a drivable par 4. It can be a drivable par 4. It can play at 420 yards. One of the other things about Erin Hills, I should say, is that the golf course, if you stretch the golf course out to its maximum, it would measure 8,500 yards, in excess of 85. And the reason for that was not because we wanted an 8,500 yard golf course, but because of the method of design we were using. We were trying to find all the natural features. So we would define the green, the landing area, and we find a tee site, and then you kind of look over your shoulder and go, you know, you could put a tee there, you could put a tee over there, and all of a sudden we have all of these tees. So the idea was that a golf hole could play, you know, 580 yards one day and play 430 yards the next. Depending on the wind and the dryness and the hole location. So it had a lot of flexibility. Well, the 15th hole had this little platform green. We called it the volcano green because, again, it was just there, and all we did was cut the bunkers in, and it came up to look like a volcano. It was a little flat top, and all we did was level it out, didn't change the grade more than a foot, and built a green, and then built the bunkers around it. When the golf course, when the tees were back, most of the players would try to land the ball in front of these bunkers and then play the second shot in. But the USGA would move the tees up, and so instead of playing 420, it might play 385. So now the players are thinking, I can play to this location in here, over that carry bunker in here, and then play into the green. And then on the very last day, they moved it up so that the hole played 295 yards. So now these guys can drive that green if they want to. So they have a choice of going for the green or laying back. Well, I knew that they were going to do that because they did it in the U.S. Amateur. And Patrick Cantlay was playing in the finals against Kelly Craft. And after the 14th hole, Patrick Cantlay was the #1 amateur in the world at that time, was 1 up. And so they go to the 15th tee, and they've been playing it at 420 all week. And there's a marshal there that said, no, guys, we're playing it from down there. And so they went down to the tee. No one had ever played it before from down there, I mean, in the amateur. And so now they had to make a decision. As it turns out, Patrick Cantley had the honor, decides to hit a 7-iron off the tee, hits a 7-iron short and lands in this bunker back here. Kelly Craft sees that he's in a bunker and he knows how bad the bunkers are, so he plays a safe shot out to here to try to give him a good angle into the green, because he knows that Cantley's in a bunker. Cantley blasts out of the bunker, knocks the ball over the green, hits a bad chip coming back, makes bogey. They're all square after 15. Cantley is so shook up when they go to the 16th hole, he hits in another bunker. Kelly Craft ends up winning the amateur 1-up. And so anyway, I knew, and this bunker right here was the most god-awful, mean bunker on the entire golf course. You did not want to be that. And what the USGA purposely did was put the hole location right beside it. Unless you brought that ball in from right to left and could lay it into this slope, chances are you're going to end up in that bunker. And the guys knew that too because of the amateur. So anyway, I'm standing back watching. I'm standing back here with my bright green lanyard, I watch a guy go in and he throws 4 balls down into the bunker, and he hits the first one, doesn't get it out. Hits the second one, doesn't get it out. Hits the third one, doesn't get it out. Finally, the 4th ball, he finally gets it out of the bunker. So I'm thinking, ooh, I better go talk to this guy. So I go up and I introduce myself. This is during a practice day. I said, hi, I'm Mike Hurdzan. I'm one of the designers. And I said, I'd like to speak to you for a minute. And he's upset. And he said, sure, what do you want to talk about? Kind of harshly. And I said, what do you think of that bunker there? And he said, did you see me play out of it? And I said, yeah, and that's why I want to talk to you. And I said, do you think it's a fair bunker? And he took a half a step back and he just looked at me, and then for about 4 or 5 seconds he didn't say anything. And he said, you know what? If that would have been a water hazard, I wouldn't have had any opportunity to play out of it. But you gave me a chance to play out of it. I just couldn't play the shot. So yes, that was a fair hazard. Well, that just renewed my feelings about some golf professionals. And I think that young man's name was Adam Hadwin. I'm not absolute, I know that he had the beard and he was about that time, had an accent. So I think it was Adam, but I was so concerned about speaking to him. But it was really rewarding to me, and one of my best memories was that experience of seeing how these guys play the golf hole. And so Erin Hills is indeed a fractured fairy tale. It's a fairy tale, fractured ones, if you will. But again, it's the backstory. It's those things that make it, give it personality, give it life, give it meaning, give it value. And those are the things that often get lost. And that's why we, as members of the Golf Heritage Society, are trying to preserve that. And that's why I'm perfectly happy to make this tape, and I hope we can share it with others. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you very much, Carl, for filming. I think there's time for just a couple of questions because if you don't know already, Mike has graciously offered to host us again at his office, which is a true golf museum. So, any questions of anybody? Bob?
Mike, during the tournament rounds of the Open, were there any holes in one on the course at all?
No, there were no holes in one. There was, and a couple of them, the par 3s played reasonably short, like 9 as an example. And but no, there weren't any holes in one. And I might say that with Koepka playing, matter of fact, on a story somewhat aligned with that, but not quite, when Justin Thomas shot that 63, he eagled the 18th hole. Well, that hole played 667 or 668 yards. And when you think about that, is what 2 shots it takes you to get home and then be able to make the putt was pretty incredible. On the last day, Brooks Koepka, who had figured this golf course out, and this is part of what we were talking about with strategy, is Brooks Koepka, the hole's playing 668 yards, hits a 3-wood off the tee. and he hit it because he knew he can land a 3-wood on the downslope of the fairway and the ball would shoot forward, whereas the guys that were hitting driver were landing in the valley over the upslope and the ball would be checking up. And so Koepka hit 2 3-woods to get home and 2 left the ball on the right front of the green. Didn't quite get, I mean, he was green high, but he wasn't on the green, and ended up chipping it up and making a birdie. But it was, again, it's a matter of that. But there were no hole-in-ones. But the more the guys played it, the smarter they got about how we need to play it.
Mike, how many sets of tees do you have? Not all of us can play it at 8,500.
Yeah, it'll go down. It'll go down to as low as 4,200. I've had friends that are in their 80s go play there, and so a lot of people. It's a 9-mile walk supposedly, based on everybody's Fitbit watch. But I've had people in the 80s that have gone there and played it 2 days in a row and said, "No, it's not that bad."
Anyone else? All right, great. Thank you again for coming.